Claude Kirchner is a researcher in, I will say, the abstract aspect of automated reasoning. He's a very influential researcher in rewriting systems, and has been in Brazil. Is a researcher in, I will say, I have to abstract something here. So, automated reasoning. Okay. Is a researcher in, I will say, the, sorry about that, abstract aspect of, okay, I have some interference with the streaming in YouTube. And has been in Brazil giving talks about rewriting systems, about his Elan system, that is a rewriting logic-based system, and also in the raw calculus. And okay, I can say that Claude Kirchner is a friend from me and from my group. And also, Jeanna was last year in a webinar from the Brazilian Academy of Science in a debate about this topic, ethics in algorithms. And Cansu Canca is a well-known philosopher with a lot of experience in several continents, in Asia, then in Europe, and also in USA, no, in America. Then they are bringing important information for use, information related with a thing that is novel for use in Brazil. You will see we are talking a lot about artificial intelligence development in Brazil. We are amazed with the applications. We are using tools for giving recommendations, for empowering the digital government, but in a certain way, we are not aware of the dangers of implementing such technologies without profiting from the discussions that have been happened in the European community, in North America, and in other countries where these technologies were first implemented and gave rise to critical problems. Then I share my my window and explain the context of this talk. I usually have a lot of things here. I have nothing to hide. Then don't worry. I know you are saying my window, but I will show you. This is the presentation. And I want to tell the attendants and also the panelists that this year the University of Brasília is completing 60 years, is 60 years old. And this presentation belongs to some celebrations, some invitations that are going the University of Brasília to the world community, mainly showing what we are doing here. I decided to discuss things that we are not doing here, but we are really crucial. I believe are vital to the developments we are working on. Then the organization is the following. First, Jeanna will talk. After Jeanna, Claude Kirchner. Finally, Cansu Canca. We will make a 5 minutes break, and then we will start a question section. Okay, then Jeanna, you can start. You can share your window. Okay. And thank you for coming.
Well, thank you so much, Mauricio. Thank you for having us here to talk about this really important topic, and congratulations on the 60th anniversary for Brasília. That's wonderful. I won't spend too much time saying that much about me. I'm a professor at Clarkson University, which is in way upstate New York, almost Canada. I continue to do work with Data and Society, it's a research institute in New York, in addition to many collaborators at ACM and IEEE and other places. If we're going to talk about ethical AI, a good place to start is to try to tackle the definition of what AI is. And that, of course, is incredibly contentious, and I don't really have any desire to try to ultimately solve that here. But in the context of ethics, I would like to recommend that we take a broad definition that includes automated systems as a whole, not just specifically if it has certain neural nets or machine learning techniques inside. Really, any systems that are being used to make big decisions about people's lives in a mix of human decision-making and automated decision-making, even if it is just recommending to humans or influencing humans. So there is a lot of talk about AI and automated systems from the tech community that goes along the lines of, this is going to be great for everyone. These are some actual quotes from prominent tech leaders. Technology is on the cusp of taking us into a magical age, solving problems today that we simply couldn't solve on our own. It will do everything from curing blindness to saving animals from extinction. It will lift us from toil and struggle into a new realm of leisure and fulfillment, a future society graced by abundance in all things, where employment is all but a crazy distant memory. How many of us think that that's likely? That often comes along with all you need to do is let us surveil your every action. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Is there really a lot of evidence that the benefits of AI even today are being spread widely throughout society? For example, consider, Amazon warehouse workers during the COVID pandemic, truck drivers, delivery workers, gig workers. So many people, and I'll recommend Karen Levy and Alex Rosenblatt's work in particular, but so many people are studying the ways in which it is contributing to income inequality and other things that are very concerning. And we just kind of look historically, at things like, medical discoveries. Are the benefits of medical discoveries being made widely available? You don't even need to look at cutting edge medical technology development. Even very low tech things like insulin, for example, in the US is not widely available to people who need it. Other places around the world are doing better at that. In any case, lots of evidence that it won't just automatically be good for all of us. And the raw ingredients of much of what we're talking about is surveillance, the recording of every digitally mediated interaction. And those records are often misleading or even wrong. I can't tell you how many times I've looked up information about me in a database and it's just not correct in many substantive ways, or it's incomplete. And that doesn't stop very powerful uses of that. And in most ways, it's stolen also, taken, buried in long, obscure terms of service that change at will. And algorithmic systems are making big decisions about all of our lives in really important areas: hiring, housing, credit, allocation of public resources, criminal justice, many things. And many of the platforms that many of us use, have more citizens than many countries and an incredibly detailed map of our lives. And they're altering the way we govern our world with very little public discussion. And that's something we can all be very concerned about. Platforms are being used not just to surveil individuals, but to micro-target individuals based on that surveillance. The same exact technology you need to identify who might be interested in a niche consumer good, the same kind of technology you need to identify someone who might be vulnerable to a niche conspiracy theory. And the techniques of propaganda, which we have known are damaging for a long time, we can look back at them and think, oh, they weren't as bad, because today what we're doing is losing the moderating force of the need to address masses of people all at once. Now with surveillance and the ability to micro-target individuals, you can tell each person exactly what you think they want to hear. And that is a recipe that's causing terrible troubles for all of us around the world. So there's no guarantee that the benefits will automatically come to you, your family, your community, your country. And there's lots of evidence that it won't. And there's plenty of harms, not just pure benefits. And there's no one type of fairness. There is hard trade-offs between efficiency and customization. And all of these new technologies are fundamentally shifting the power landscape, with there being winners and losers. So a message that this is going to be good for everyone is just lulling people into complacency. I'm not going to take too much time to talk about multiple definitions of fairness. I wonder if some of the other panelists will, but I'll put a few shout outs to some great pieces that go over that. So there's no one definition of fairness, no one definition of ethics. And in that context, it's really very essential that we give people the information they need to see the potential harms and benefits and argue in their own best interest in a political process to influence these trade-offs. Telling them disingenuously it'll be great for everyone is just not true. We need pro-transparency, pro-accountability aspects to these systems, including explanations, aggressive third-party testing, and a lot more. And I think we need to do a lot more of imagining beyond the benefits of our work. This whole it's going to be good for everyone, we like to imagine the positive uses of our work. I don't know how many of those listening are computer science folks like me. I know on the panel we have other disciplines represented. But, I think all researchers, all developers like to imagine the ways our work could help. We don't like to imagine the ways our work could ruin lives and societies, but we can see all around us our failure to do exactly that. And I think in research communities, we could do a lot by requiring that papers discuss not just the possible benefits, but the possible harms, and do a lot more proactive preparation for misuse in deployed systems ahead of time. So what is the worst thing that you think is likely to happen with ungoverned algorithms and platforms? Some people say, oh, the worst that happens is targeted advertising, or maybe they say private data in the wrong hands. But it goes so much beyond that in ways I think the average person does not understand. Really big decisions made about all of our lives, hiring, housing, credit, criminal justice, etc. And also the potential for your opinion and actions to be manipulated by the micro-targeting in ways I think many of us think we might be immune to and very much are not. So we have this now complex decision-making landscape that is very much changing. Platforms and automated decision-making are fundamentally changing the way we make decisions across the landscape of our societal decision-making processes. And in that process of automation, we might say to ourselves, it's the same decisions, we just automated them to make them more efficiently. but that's not true. We are fundamentally changing the way we're making decisions, and in some ways undermining principles that we think we run our societies according to principles, but in the process of automating, we are setting some of those principles aside and asking, what do we need to do to secure our decision-making landscape, our socio-technical landscape, to debug these complex socio-technical systems, rather than just say, oh, those are unbiased decisions made by computer, efficiently, logically, better than that biased human decision-making. I think those of you in computing certainly understand the ways in which any automated decision-making system reflects programmer bias. It reflects learning from past data, learning from the wisdom of crowds, sometimes not as wise as other times. And even if algorithms are deliberately asked to ignore explicit attributes like race, gender, religion, there's many proxies for all of that information that systems are very good at finding and making decisions on the basis of. And it's really important to grapple with the fact that the interests of deciders are very different than the interests of those that are being decided about. So these automated decision-making systems, what is accurate enough? Even what is the definition of accuracy? What's going to be the metric? When is the system good enough? Good enough according to who? For a decider, say you're talking about a credit system. A decider might say, it looks to me like we're loaning out money and getting a good return. These decisions are fine with me. They're accurate enough for me. That doesn't mean that they're accurate enough to protect the legitimate legal rights of those people about whom decisions are being made. And that's the same thing in hiring, in housing, and criminal justice. There can be a lot of rare cases that are wrong, that need to be debugged, that really matter to individuals, for which the developers and the deciders don't have the incentives to invest the careful work it would take to robustly investigate, test, verify, debug. In many ways, we have conflicts between the efficiency for deciders, reducing the risks for deciders, and protection of the rights of individuals. And if we leave that balance just to the developers and the deciders, we're going to have problems. And you might say it's like a tax on deciders, but really that's nothing new. In many of our societies, we put limits on the decisions entities can make in the interests of society or the rights of individuals. A very clear example of that is saying you're not allowed to discriminate against young women in the workforce because they might get pregnant and leave. You can't do that. And a business might say, oh, I have to invest a lot of money. I would like to avoid that possibility, that risk to myself. And we say, you can't do that. I mean, everyone was born. Everyone should share the cost of that across society. That's just one example. So any of us who build complex systems know that bugs are not surprising. You can test something on a set of test data and really feel good about it. You roll it out into production and it breaks and breaks and breaks and breaks. That is not surprising. But if we embed it in a socio-technical environment that does not incentivize the iterative debugging, the iterative improvement that says this is good enough, we may be dooming whole groups of people to be subjected to bad decision-making that affects them forever, because those rare cases are not important enough to developers or deciders. And market forces that we are used to thinking about market forces incentivizing iterative improvement. It's really important to understand that when the paying customers are the deciders, market forces may often be insufficient to protect the rights of those being decided about. So in my research group, we look at criminal justice software in particular and natural language processing systems. And in the criminal justice software, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about today, we do a lot to document insufficient testing and willingness to evade oversight and needed debugging. And in NLP, we often look at underrepresentation and gender bias in the conclusions that come out of corpora of text, of human text. So talking about criminal justice systems, this was a team of folks that we got a Brown Institute Magic Grant to look at forensic DNA software, the software that matches evidence found at crime scenes to possible suspects. And we've looked at a number of such systems, but one of them that we looked at was the Forensic Statistical Tool, FST, that was developed in New York by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. And it was used for over 6 years in very serious cases, murders, rapes, very serious things. And the defense attorneys would constantly say, this is a crucial piece of information to your case. We'd like to understand how software got that answer. And the system would say, no, you don't have a right to look, even under protective order. So there was a larger socio-technical decision-making system that really had no transparency, no accountability. And it turns out that the first expert witness that got a chance to take a look at that found so many problems that they published the source code on GitHub. It's a little bit of a longer story how that came to be, but the problems were so stunning that the source code ended up on GitHub. And what we know now after studying this system is that when they brought the system online, as I said, it began to fail and fail and fail. And the way they fixed it was just by discarding data that was inconvenient to them, that caused bugs in their system, rather than truly fixing it. And they did this without notifying the defense, even when drop data that could have been useful to them. And this function, if you look at some of the details of this, you'll see things like for each data row, each row in the race table, if the frequency is greater than 0.97, just remove that data. That's not sounding so good. Even if you're not a programmer, you could look at that and say, that doesn't smell right. So one of our papers presented the first analysis of this undisclosed function. So this source code that had been jealously guarded for 6 years and was suddenly on GitHub, we took a good look at it, examined it on their own validation study, so no surprising cases. And we basically found that 104 of those 449 samples triggered that data dropping behavior. So there was a lot of just discarding data, even in their own validation study. And we found 5 cases where basically the simulation of innocent people would have been correctly excluded without this data dropping function, but were falsely accused with it included. So that was a really important result for defense teams. And you ask, in this system, what would be the hope of an individual seeing whether a change like this impacted them? How would it even have been possible to find it without access to the source code? And like all of this work of debugging the system falling to under-resourced individual defense teams, all of that is a terrible recipe for justice. So this is an example of critical software. Automated decision-making software might not be AI in the sense of machine learning or neural nets or things like that, but very much a mix of human and automated decision-making software, and no incentive for debugging for many, many years. Really just kind of a response of, oh, you don't like these results, you must just be complaining because you're guilty. And criminal justice software is really just one example. It's kind of like a canary in the coal mine. It's especially, I think, bad because, if, say, the software for an airplane fails and the plane crashes, or software for a medical device fails and people get sick as a result, there's generally a recognition that that needs to be fixed. But in the criminal justice system, there has been historically an investment in protecting the rights of defendants. So you can look at this and you can think this is just one example of critical automated decision-making software for which there weren't incentives for debugging, about decisions just made without important levels of transparency. You can ask how many decisions are being made about you like that every day, whether it's, again, hiring, housing, credit, dating software, maps, so many things. And will we have the ability to question those results that do so much to run our modern societies? What are we doing to require evidence of quality, sufficient quality to protect the rights of individuals, not just sufficient for the interests of protecting the interests of deciders? So what are some evidence of quality? Well, these are things we know software engineers have known for a long time. Attributes of the input data and training set, software requirements and specification, design documents, risk assessment, source code review, version labeling, internal test plans, bug tracking, training and competency of system users and developers. We know how to do this. The question is, what will incentivize it in critical software that makes big decisions about people's lives, that might be making inappropriate decisions without real incentives for debugging? There are standards for things like this, like IEEE has the 1012 standard for system software and hardware verification and validation. And we know how to require that for things like airplane software or medical devices, but are we going to require it for criminal justice software? IEEE 1012 has a kind of set of levels, so things that affect human life, for example, very high level, and I think criminal justice software like this counts. But there are other levels. If it's hiring and housing and credit are also very important. And at the very highest level, it requires independent third-party testing, verification and validation. It's important that it not be done by the same group, not to have managerial independence, financial independence, technical independence. So, rights to view the data stored about you, ask that data be deleted, view the decisions that are made about you, understand how the decision was made, receive an explanation, challenge a decision, have processes for redress, understand who's paying to influence you. All of these things are things that are not going to happen automatically. We're going to have to really fight for them. Another thing is requiring reinvestment of some of the savings from automation into teams of humans incentivized to find errors, violations of individual rights, or bias. So as you automate things and require fewer and fewer people to do some of the front end work, we should be redeploying some of those people to really respond to reports of errors in a very aggressive way. That might be a better way for automated decision makings and human decision making to work together than kind of deploying humans to just rubber stamp automated decision making systems so that it's technically a human decision. Yeah. So, we can think about the future we want here, right? Back to that thing I said from some of those quotes from tech leaders. I want to cure cancer and save animals from extinction and have more leisure time. I'm sure we all do. But I don't want to be promised those things in a bait and switch for rising inequality and surveillance and control and manipulation. And I think that's a lot more what we're getting these days. There's a lot of evidence that the benefits are not being spread widely around in the way it's being promised. To get the future we want, we're going to need to say no to the versions of technology we're being offered now, and that's not easy. Powerful technologies enable good and ill, and we are not seriously working on how to control the ill when all we do is say, oh, it's going to be great for everyone, or just, wishful thinking about the good. There's no free lunch here. We need to secure digital infrastructure like platforms and algorithmic decision-making systems so they work for everyone. We need to think about the way in which they can support human well-being, healthy societies, and democratic principles. That's not going to happen automatically. There's lots of evidence that it will actually be harmful to those things. A short-sighted focus on just efficiency for decision makers is not going to get us the future we want. We need to design technology so that it is transparent, and accountable, that we can rule it rather than it ruling us. We need wide representation in training sets, development teams, and testing. Accountability, transparency, real engagement in the discussions of trade-offs with stakeholders, not just empty promises that it will be great for everyone. If we want automated decision-making that protects the rights of individuals in healthy societies, that reduces bias rather than amplifying it, and that is a possibility, we are going to have to work for it and demand it. It will not be automatic, because it will not be in the interests of deciders and developers to do that. So thank you very much for giving me the chance to kick us off. This is some of my contact information, and I now happily pass it on to my fellow panelists.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeanna, for the very nice presentation. Then we can move now to Claude. Please, Claude.
Yes.
Also, thank again for coming.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm just looking at the right window to share with you. Too many windows. Okay. Just 2 minutes, sorry. Where is that? So again. Okay. It is. Okay. Okay. You should see that now. Now, is that right?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, good. So thank you again for the invitation, and thank you also for Jeanna for a very nice talk, and indeed some kind of introduction to many things that I will talk now about. So I would like first to insist on the fact that we are undergoing a profound digital conversion, and this is a formidable opportunity, source of progress and innovation, with also many unexpected usages in particular. For example, this usage of the Paris advertisement panels is a usage that was not planned as such, okay? And it make us asking a lot of questions about security, about opportunities, about the kind of things that we can indeed do with this kind of digital tools. Another example is the following one, where indeed Siri, the chatbot, could be used, of course, by everyone in order to chat, but also by people that are that have some difficulties with like autistic people. So in this case, we can see that the chatbot has not been designed for these people, and the usage of this kind of tools can be inappropriate. So we have to think about this kind of application and usages of digital tools. This is just two examples that are simple, just in order to understand the cases, but of course there are many more. But we should consider that we are in an evolution that includes that we do not see or do not see longer. Okay, that is like the energy production, like electricity, gas, and so on. We need digital tools for that. Fluid management, same thing. Logic chain, supermarket supplies, and so on, same thing. Scientific research from astronomy, history, economics, informatics, medicine, same thing. We need digital tools and digital science and technology. Agriculture, of course, and biomedical, yes, we indeed very recently experiment this big need with vaccine development, just an example. So we are in an evolution and a conversion. And in some sense, it is also something that Jeanna was telling us. Okay, so following Milad Douei, conversion requires a retrospective examination of the past, thus the reinterpretation and recapturing of older frameworks and contents into the new ones, as well as new explanation of actions and events. So the digital technology and sciences put us in a situation where we are in this conversion and we are in this retrospective examination of the past, as well as new explanation of action and events. So just in order to give some rough definition of what I call digital science and technology, it includes artificial intelligence. I will tell a little bit about that. But we introduce a new name indeed in French. We call that le numérique. And it is an expression covering sciences whose respective domain overlap, including computer science, network and communication science, signal processing, mathematics, automation, robotics, machine learning, data science, parts of physics and cognitive science, as well as the technology and uses derived from them. So this is a very broad domain, but indeed, all of them are dealing with the manipulations, the transformation of information. So information treatment. And what about AI in this context? So AI is part of these digital sciences and technology. And AI indeed is the name of a science and technology field. And I recall here the European Union definition that indeed, I believe is close to what Jeanna was saying too. Okay, that is, it encompasses machine learning approaches, including supervised and unsupervised reinforcement learning and so on, using a wide variety of methods, including deep learning. But it includes also logic and knowledge-based approaches, including knowledge representation, inductive logic programming, knowledge-based, inference and deductive engines, symbolic reasoning, and expert systems. It includes also statistical approaches, bias and estimation, search and optimization methods. So it also helps in taking decisions. So in this context, is that better? Yes. In this context, indeed, what does the representation of digital processing of information, what does it have such an impact on humans, their organizations, health, and medicine in particular? So I believe there is one main reason for that we can discuss, is that we are biological information processing systems. And we are not only that, but the reading of the text that you can read now on your screen, the functioning of an organ, the reasoning conducted to understand a situation, are all information processing operations that often are absolutely non-elementary. So in a context where us as humans and digital information processing systems indeed co-evolve, as we can see, as we have seen just before, as we can live every day, they complement each other, So they interact, they collaborate, and indeed they combine with profound consequences for human and non-humans. Keeping in mind that digital systems are human designed, so there is a kind of reflexivity between the fact that we are information processing systems, biological ones, not the only one, indeed, and we just invented the digital information processing systems. We indeed collaborate and co-evolve with them, that we are the responsible for this co-evolution and for the invention, indeed, of these new digital systems. So this gives rise to what we can call the cyber civilization, based on a deep synergy between biological and digital information processing system, based on mastery and confidence in information processing systems considered globally, that is not only the digital ones, but also the biological ones. So we need to understand things globally and not saying that this is the fault of something else. It relies on non-trivial qualities of digital information systems like cybersecurity, efficiency, confidence, and so on. Jeanna was also talking about that. And so we are in need of ethics, understood as, I take the definition given by the French Academic Dictionary, which is reflection on human behavior and the value on which they are based, carried out with a view to establish a doctrine, a science of morality. So this is the definition of ethics that I will take for this talk. Of course, this can be discussed, but this is something important to just realize that this is a reflection on human behavior and values. And this is not a state, this is not, for example, a set of rules, okay? This is something that invites us to think. So digital and cyber ethics integrates important and lasting influence of digital technology on humans, but also the fascination provoked by machines that imitate the living. Radical and universal questioning on the way we consider today human autonomy, social and political relationships, contribution of digital technology to the objective of sustainable development, in particular for education, culture, health, social justice, economy, environment. So this is a part of what we have designed as a manifesto for digital ethics that I will say a few words later on. Okay, ethics indeed has a long tradition in France. So in particular, in 1983, there was a creation of the National Ethics Committee for Health and Life Sciences. Indeed, it was the beginning of the situation where we were able to clone animals and maybe different people. And so it is at this occasion that indeed there was this National Ethics Committee that was created at that time. So there are, of course, a lot of things to say between 1983 and 2009. But in 2009, indeed, there was a main step with a joint presentation of CNRS and INRIA reports on the importance of digital ethics. So indeed, digital ethics was not really a topic in France before that date. And after that presentation and after indeed taking this point into consideration more seriously, there was a creation of a French ethics committee for research on digital sciences, so informatics, mathematics, robotics, and so on, and where indeed the main academic bodies in France were collaborating in setting up this ethics committee. And at almost the same time, there was the creation of an operation ethics committee inside INRIA in order to deal with specific ethic questions related to projects, the scientific project in the INRIA Institute. And then in 2019, there was the creation of the National Pilot Committee for Digital Ethics, which has been formally established in December on the request of the French Prime Minister, under the committee, under the aegis of the committee dealing with health and bioethics, and hosted on this premise. So there was three first referrals to address about autonomous vehicle, chatbot, medical diagnosis, and AI. And the committee also says himself on digital ethics issues in situation of acute health crisis, of course, because of the COVID pandemic. And there was a lot of work done on these topics, and including several bulletins, answer to the new government referrals, answer to our consultation, work on the initial referrals on autonomous vehicles, and so on. So this was just doing the main part of the pandemic. And indeed, this committee consists of 27 members coming from different science and bodies, so coming from informatics, robotics, lawyers, philosophy, ethics, economics, including medical doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, a French member of a member of the French Parliament, a member of the national regulation body on data, people from scientific culture, historian also, and with active connection with other ethics committee. So because it is, of course, important to get a web of all the connection concerning ethics, not only concerning digital science and technology, but also health, harmony, education, but also CNRS, which has its own ethics committee, and internationally, of course, with the high-level expert group from the European Union, with JPI, with UNESCO, with IEEE, with WHO, the World Health Organization. So, a few examples of what we did. We work typically during the pandemics. We work on fraternity and digital tools for pandemics. So indeed, during the lockdown, digital tools were very important in order to communicate, in order to work, in order to learn, in order to just share with others. And when, for some reason, you are in the street and without many resources, it becomes even more difficult to live. And so we were looking at this kind of questions, and I can detail later if you want. We were also working on digital tools for pandemics. That is, what kind of tools we can use and what kind of questions we should rise in order to get these tools working well in a sense of, for example, what Jeanna was saying before. We are working also on disinformation and misinformation in the context of course, of the pandemics, but not only. Okay, I'm trying to understand all the process in order to set up misinformation or disinformation, but also controlling the propagation of such things. And okay, a lot of recommendation and an opinion that we give on these topics. We were working also on telemedicine and telecare in pandemics. And as we have seen, okay, it was of course very helpful to be able to use digital tools in order to communicate and to perform telediagnosis and telecare. But indeed, the tools were not really well designed in order to perform that. In particular, there was a lot of questions about cybersecurity, about privacy, about a lot of data and indeed medical data that are, of course, quite sensible that were exposed to in such a way that there were some loss of information in many ways and stealing of information. We were also working on digital tools for lifting the lockdown, and this was quite interesting because in that part we were discussing what's the interaction indeed between the sanitary sovereignty. Okay, so how can we master for a given country or continent or city or family event? Okay, how can we master the strategy that we would like to design and apply in that country? It is really a question of sovereignty, or if you prefer, of strategic autonomy. And indeed, it was not so simple to design the appropriate digital tools in order to do that. And okay, I can explain more if you want. We have also worked on autonomous vehicle and autonomous, as you can see, between quotes, because of course vehicles are not autonomous. Okay, they can be automated, but they are not autonomous. We were also working on chatbots and raising a lot of issues like injuries in using by chatbots, but also about dead bots that are this chatbot that model the expression of people that are already dead and that may be relative to you. We were also designing a manifesto for digital ethics, also available in English, okay, and so we try to explain why we believe important to set up ethics committee at the national level in order to make possible to provide to the parliament, to the political level, opinions that help them to later take decisions. And we were also writing a book with 20 people, mainly issued from the ethics committee, in order to explain what is digital ethics and AI indeed, and why it is important to work on. So our current activities in the committee are still working on several referrals. That is ethical issues, giving opinions, about ethical issues about medical diagnosis and AI. So this is in common with the bioethics committee. Giving also reflections about facial, postural, and behavioral recognition, which poses a lot of questions, and taking decision in this situation poses a lot of questions and sometimes main problems. We are also working on health data platforms. That is, how can we share data concerned with health? How can we help designing better? Can we help research in order to design better vaccine, for example? But what are the trade-offs? What are the tensions between looking at these data and using these data maybe for good things, but maybe not completely always in this direction. And a new refer is about metaverse, but okay, it is just beginning. So we are also working and thinking and working on education to make possible for everyone to have his own ethics, okay, and that is to be able to think by himself about the questions that rise in this digital era. So these an important topics that we are developing currently, and we are also trying to make knowledgeable what we have designed, what we are thinking, the opinion that we have written, and in order to do that we participate to several events organization, like one in June about digital ethics in Europe, and one next October about what we can say about beyond compliance. So our current plan is, as a first step, to create a permanent digital ethics committee. You understood that currently what we have done since the December 2019 was as a pilot committee, but there was a decision to go further and to make it permanent. So there should be a decree that to be published soon, where the chair should be nominated by the French president, with 33 individuals nominated by various ministries and institutions, with a 3 years mandate renewable arms. And this is the first step. And the second step shall be to create by law a national consultative ethics committee with several colleges for health and bioethics first, but also digital, including AI and extended reality, and possibly with environment, but also we can think about more things like innovation or financial concerns. So this is our current plans, and a few concluding remarks. So the first one is that the ethics is an imperative of digital humanism. So of course we have to work around that and to understand what it means, but it is important indeed to connect what we have created using the digital and to make this digital humanism something that we analyze using ethics. Ethics is, especially in the digital world, is also a competitive advantage for companies, and I believe that we have to work on that in order to be able to understand what are the values of a company, how can we check them, how are they implemented in what they produce, and this also comes to, in some sense, to what Jeanna was also telling us. And ethics also could help taking into full consideration the environment footprint of digital technology, which is enormous and which will be indeed even stronger in the near future. So thank you very much, and I leave the floor to the next panelist.
Okay, Claude. Thank you very much for the nice presentation and so informative. I think we don't have, unfortunately, as much information from France as from other countries, no? And it's fantastic to know about the progress France is having this direction, no? Amazing. Okay, thank you very much again, and then we can go to Cansu Canca. Thanks again, Cansu. You can share your window.
Thank you, Mars. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm gonna try to keep it brief. You can hear me and you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I decided to talk about the AI ethics principles. I am not very familiar with the discussion that's going on in Brazil, so I thought that I'll do a quick. I did a quick research, and as far as I can see, the principles seem to be a part of the discussion as it is in many places, as it has been in many places. So I thought maybe a topic that would be of interest would be to talk about AI ethics principles. And among them, I thought particularly to sort of like start with an example of the OECD AI principles, look at the general trend in the world, and also talk about how we can think about AI principles in application. So the OECD has published these principles in 2019. And so here I put the list of value-based principles that they have, the 5 principles, and also the 5 recommendations for policymakers. I'm going to just focus on the principles. We can talk about the policy aspect in the Q&A. But the basic idea that they claim is that the OECD AI principles promote use of AI that is innovative and trustworthy and that respects human rights and democratic values. So here is a set of principles for that aim. So that's the goal. This is the OECD principles are, so the talk is not about OECD principles. The talk is about AI ethics principles. As I said, it's just an example that I'm using. But the OECD principles are a part of a more general trend that has happened in the world over the last, 5-7 years. So then whenever you start counting. But what we did when this surge of AI ethics principles started happening around the world, what we did at AI Ethics Lab is to look at the, well, basically we wanted to be able to understand all of these different principles, and we wanted to put it in a structure where we can look at them more in detail. So we created a toolkit called this Dynamics of AI Principles, and we basically put them in a map with indicating what type of organization has published them, the chronology, the heat map, and the when you hover on those pins, you can also see the summaries, and you can compare the different summaries of principles that are from all of these organizations. So the toolkit is not just this. There's a whole web page on this. But what we see is that in 2015 there has been only 4 publications, and in 2021, and we are due for an update. So this is when we did the last update in 2021. There were over 100 sets of AI ethics principles published around the world. And this is an interesting and sort of like a curious phenomenon, because we don't, like in ethics, we don't have all companies publishing their principles. Like we don't have different, health principles published by every organization, or environmental principles published by every organization. Not like this type of trend. So this was an interesting exercise. But the most important thing is, okay, now we have these principles. What do we do with them? How do we make them? How do we put them into action? So that sort of brings us back to, I wanted to sort of tie it a little bit to the earlier presentations as well. Why are we talking about AI ethics principles? What's the goal of AI ethics? So taking a step back, the core question of AI ethics, well, the core question of ethics is, applied ethics is, what is the right good thing to do? And what is the right and fair system to implement? So when we think about the ethical questions, the goal of ethics, this is what we are trying to get to. And we do that by using a systematic way of reasoning and decision making. So we are not just relying on the legal instruments. We are not relying on moral feelings only. We are not looking at the trends of moral behavior, but we are actually asking this normative question: what should be done? What is the right thing to do? And we use different philosophical tools to deal with that, such as we have the theories from moral and political philosophy. We have different thought experiments, analogies, all of those type of things that we use in philosophy. And of course, if we are situating ethics in an applied field like AI, then we have to understand from other fields, from social sciences and from sciences, we have to understand what is the ethical, what is the social and ethical structure of the topic that we are talking about. So for example, if we are talking about healthcare technologies, we have to understand what are the socioeconomic effects of health impacts, socioeconomic aspects of health and healthcare. And we have to understand that ethical and social landscape in order to ask what is the right, let's say, health policy to implement. And if we add the AI system, let's say we are now adding a tool that determines who should get the treatment first. So an AI tool that helps prioritize patients. Now we have an added question about the technology and how that technology might will affect the individuals and the groups within that among the stakeholders. So when we are engaging with the AI ethics, we are necessarily using information from many other disciplines, and then we are asking this core question: what is the right thing to do? And we can also divide the AI ethics focus areas into 3 specific areas: the content and product. So we want to develop ethical technologies, which means that technologies that have the value that have the justified value judgments incorporated into them, because a lot of the technologies do come with a value judgment incorporated in them. The process, we want to make sure that as we are developing technologies, we do this ethically. So the research phase of the development of the innovation should also be ethically done, and that is a part of AI ethics as well. And implementation, we want to make sure that even when the product or the project is completed, we want to make sure that the resulting product is used ethically. So all of these fall under AI ethics. Now, going back to AI ethics principles, then what we want is for these principles to help us guide through the whole AI lifecycle, from research until the release of the tool, the product, the AI system, and the updating of it. And we want to cover all components of this, like from data to the human-computer interaction. And usually the AI ethics principles want to provide guidance in determining the right action throughout the life cycle. And also, since we want to have, ethics is one of those things that is hard to incentivize. So it is not necessary, but in a way needed to have legal structures, the regulations around it, so that it has some teeth to it. We want the principles to also help guide the policymakers for enforcing and incentivizing ethical behavior to a certain degree. Again, that is something that must be discussed, to what degree regulation should control ethical behavior, of course. Now the new question exists in all areas of ethics, but also in AI ethics. So now going back to the OECD AI principles, we have these 5 principles. Inclusive growth, the first one is inclusive growth, sustainable development, and well-being. The second one is human-centered values and fairness. The third one is transparency and explainability. Fourth one is robustness, security, and safety. And the fifth one is accountability. Now the question is, how can we put these into action? What would be the way to put them into action? And there is a problem with most of the AI ethics most of those sets of AI ethics principles. There's a problem of putting different types of concepts together. So let me go with some definitions here. So when we look at these, what these principles mean within the OECD's documentation. So the second principle, human-centered values and fairness, has a very long explanation. It says AI actors should respect the rule of law, human rights, and democratic values throughout the AI system lifecycle. These include freedom, dignity, and autonomy, privacy and data protection, non-discrimination and equality, diversity, fairness, social justice, and internationally recognized labor rights. To this end, AI actors should implement mechanisms and safeguards such as capacity for human determination that are appropriate to the context and consistent with the state of art. One could say that this principle contains everything that ethics has to offer. In comparison, accountability is a very straightforward principle. AI actors should be accountable for the proper functioning of AI systems and for the respect of the above principles based on their roles, the context, and consistent with the state of art. So in a way, when we look at these principles, these are not the same type of concepts. They are a little bit comparing apples to oranges. So when you want to apply them, for example, in decision making, well, the whole goal of these principles are to help decision making. We are not talking about same type of demands. So let's take an example. You are trying to figure out a question related to ranking all algorithms in search engines. And let's say you want to understand whether a certain type of prioritization fits these principles. Well, what accountability demands here is, as I said, quite straightforward, but when we go back to the human-centered values, in order to apply this principle, you have to unpack pretty much everything, like everything that philosophy has to offer, as I said. You have to understand the freedom, what dignity means, which is notoriously incredibly difficult concept to deal with. What does dignity entail, and how does it compare to, let's say, well-being of an individual or rational decision-making of an individual? So it is very difficult to use a framework like this. So when we want to, we can put this in a more coherent structure. As I said, so the second principle, human-centered values and fairness, is really the main goal. It summarizes everything that we are trying to achieve in AI ethics. Some aspects that OECD principles emphasize is inclusive of this goal, is inclusive growth, sustainable development, and well-being. And one can say that they also emphasize certain technical instruments for this: robustness, security, safety, transparency, and explainability. Interestingly, for example, they did not emphasize something like privacy here. And then they emphasize a procedural instrument about the whole thing, accountability. As they said, accountability applies to all of the above. If we think about this like this, you can see there's a structure, but then as we are employing these principles, how are we supposed to, which ones are we supposed to start with, where do we start, and how do we go about making a decision? So this is basically to summarize, the principles are not of the same kind and they cannot be compared. And if so, how can this framework be guiding for decision making? And this is not an OECD framework problem. This is almost present in, not in all above 100 sets of AI ethics principles, but majority of it. So above 90%, let's say. We want to, so in order to sort of work with these principles, I think one way to think about them is sort of go back and understand where these principles come from. None of this is new to AI ethics. So this comes from the principlism structure that was first put forth in 1970s. So Claude mentioned the bioethics committees. And yes, it's very relevant because AI ethics is a part of the applied ethics, just like bioethics and research ethics has been. And research ethics in particular has been the one area of ethics that has been put in practice most rigorously. Not necessarily in a perfect way, of course, but in a very detailed manner. So the principlism structure was put forth in 1970s for research ethics. So this is after World War II, after human experimentation. And the idea was there, we need to communicate ethical theories, ethical decision-making to practitioners who are not ethicists. This should sound familiar. This is sort of what they are trying to do at this point in AI ethics as well. And what they did in this principlism framework is basically looking at these ethical theories, moral and political theories, Kantian ethics, consequentialism, utilitarianism, different types of theories of justice, egalitarianism, like egalitarianism, Rawlsian theory. So looking at these what they wanted to do, so the principles was created by Grisham and Childress, two philosophers. What they wanted to do was to come up with the basic core values. So autonomy, do no harm, but really minimization of harm, prevention of harm, and creation of benefits, doing good. And justice were the sort of like these, almost like a bumper sticker style way of clarifying the main values, core values in these different theories. And in the context of research ethics, they also specified certain applications like informed consent and assessment of risks and benefits and selection of subjects in terms of fairness. So this whole thing then became like, we are using this structure basically when we are talking about AI ethics principles, but somehow there's a little bit of it seems like a disconnect with the foundations of this way of thinking to all these sets of AI principles that are being published. So what we did with the Dynamics of AI Principles Toolkit, we basically put all the principles that are published under these core values. And you can collect everything under these core values because, for example, human control is an instrument for autonomy. When we say autonomy, what we try to achieve is we want to make sure that the core value of autonomy is that there is a understanding that humans have the capacity of individuals to be able to decide for themselves, make decisions about their lives, should be respected. This is the core value. Human control is an aspect of it. Consent is an aspect of it. Privacy is an aspect of it. We don't value privacy for the sake of privacy or consent for the sake of consent, but we value them because they serve a function. They allow us to have a control over our lives, over our sphere. So we went a step further after putting them into these different boxes, and we tried to create a tool to use as a sort of like a checklist, sort of like a starting point of reasoning, to show that which instruments are helping what core values. Once we understand that, for example, privacy and consent are both in a way serving for autonomy, serving for individual self-determination, then we can use them more effectively. In circumstances where consent is not possible, this is also something that is not specific to AI ethics, comes from bioethics. If consent is not, taking informed consent is not feasible in using data, one way of dealing with this problem is to make sure that the data is de-identified. If you really cannot connect it back to any individual, if you can never violate anyone's information about themselves, then there is no real need for consent in most cases. Not always, of course. This balance doesn't always hold, but it is a very common way of engaging with the data, both in bioethics but also in AI ethics. So understanding how these instruments serve these core values, we can see where we have a major problem, where we have a question causing these core values clash, versus where we have issues that we can actually deal with by tweaking other principles and covering, protecting the core values. So we created this one, published in 2020, together with a paper that was published in the Communications of the ACM. And the second version of this is in progress, because the philosophical work behind this is, of course, one can better these structures by working on the philosophical aspects as well. So going back to the principles, and this is really my last slide to wrap up, is if we are going to take these principles seriously and put them into action, we have to understand that these principles are helping us recognize and remember ethical considerations we must take into account. And in order to do that, they have to be also in a coherent structure. We cannot put, as I said, apples and oranges in the same basket and try to come up with a decision-making mechanism out of this mixture. We also have to understand what are the limitations of principles, because any principle-based framework, which goes for things like human rights framework as well, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a principle-based framework as well. They are not coherent in the way that theories are. There will be conflicts between principles, and those conflicts cannot be resolved just looking at these principles. We have to go back to the theories that are the foundations of these principles. So we cannot rely on principles fully guiding us, which means that we cannot also just simply give these principles to the practitioners and expect them to be ethics experts. But we can expect that simple, maybe simple is a simplification, but not so complex ethical problems, questions in ethics that are not yet ethical dilemmas, to be resolved using checklists, because a lot of the problems that we see in AI ethics are not the most complex issues that require deep research, but it is really oversight. Not thinking about the harm that a project can inflict, not even thinking about necessarily the value of the project. What is the benefit of the project, that whether or not it justifies the risks or the resources. All of these are the things that if we can bring it to the attention of the practitioner, we already cover a lot of the ground. And then once we have these principles to help us make some decision making, that is taking us to the next level. And the principles, if they also can serve to articulate what are the complex ethical dilemmas and help practitioners see them, that will take us to the third level, to the next level, where the ethics experts can then come in and help do a more deeper either research or collaborative problem solving with practitioners. So that is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cansu, for the nice and informative presentation. Then we will make now 5 minutes pause, and then we come back to the questions. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I think we can restart. And okay, I am very happy, and once again I comment to the speakers that it's unfortunately a new topic that has not been well discussed in Brazil. Despite the fact that the Brazilian government and industry is very, I will say, innovative with application of top technologies. Then currently we have amazing advances in digital government, in financial banking, also application in medicines, but as you should know, Brazil is a country with 30% of functional analphabetism, and with several differences and okay, great problems. Then I will start checking. There is some question. I will put a question from the attendants, and okay, one of the question is you talked about positive ethics. That means it's important people know that it's not a matter of banning the development of the technology, but having some positive ethics in order to make that the technology is useful for the society. And well, I will put a question from Leo Cunha. Is okay. Which is the tendency of ethics in medical technologies? I think it's a question by Leonardo Cunha. Then he wants to know whether there are some specific measures and approaches and strategies in order to inject ethics in the development of medical technologies. As far as I see, Claude mentioned several interests in this direction in France. But okay. Could you answer, Claude?
I can say a few things about that. Yes, a few, just not so few indeed. But indeed, first we shall understand that there are main values that are beyond medical ethics, like autonomy, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, and it is one on one side, and there are other, as we have seen, there are other values on the side of digital ethics, like of course. First, the same, okay? They are still of interest, of course, but there are also values like transparency, like fairness, and so on. And so, when we consider together cyber ethics and bioethics, in some sense, so this means that we have to combine these two kinds of values, and this add, of course, an additional complexity. So let me take, for example, the situation of medical diagnosis and artificial intelligence. So you see, currently we know how to, for example, analyze pictures of. I'm not sure about the English term. Sorry, IRM, or that is all the picture of our body that we can take, okay, using different devices, and so this can be analyzed very precisely and with very good results indeed. So this means that now there is a triangle between the machine that provides good results, okay, so good help for the diagnosis, the medical doctor, and the patient. So this triangle now has to deal with the question of how can we combine, how can the medical doctor take into consideration what the machine suggests to him, okay, that, for example, there is a diagnosis about cancer, and how can he check, how can he give some control on the decision that he should make about is there a cancer or not? Can I use this digital tool as something that allows me to make a real diagnosis that I am performing in front of my patient? So you see the triangle now is something which is more complex to deal with, and that we need to understand the different values and the tension that are between these different values, because we can think that, of course, the patient can access also the same digital tools, but he is not really able maybe to understand what kind of meaning he has, not the same knowledge as a medical doctor. So this means that he has some knowledge, he comes with his knowledge to the medical doctor, but the relationship and the values that have to be shared between, of course, the autonomy of the patient, the informed consent of the patient in front of the medical doctor and the machine, the situation is quite different from what we had before, okay, where there was no machine in between, and there was only the patient and the medical doctor. So in such a situation, we need, for example, so what we advise is that, of course, the medical doctor should be trained in this new situation. And the situation is, as I said before, we are in a conversion. That is, the medical doctors should think in a different way, taking into consideration the information processing system, and the patient also should be in the same revision and conversion of the way to deal with his own health. So I don't know if it makes sense as an answer to the question, but yes. So the interaction between values and principle for health on one side, and for the digital on the other side, it's very fruitful, is complex, and it needs to be rethinked in such a way that we combine the two kind of reflections on these different kind of values.
Okay, thank you, Claude, for the detailed answer. And I put a question from Jose Antonio Siqueira de Cerqueira for Yanshu in the chat. Jose Antonio asked whether, do you see how organizations can comply to OECD principles? Can you talk about the difference between ethics in AI systems and moral decision-making systems?
Well, let me try to answer as much as I can. So the first part, can organizations comply with the OECD principles? No, I mean, that is sort of the problem, because if you are basically saying, I mean, OECD principles is saying be ethical because it is extremely broad, but I don't think this is necessarily a wrong thing, in the sense that if we think of it as if, like, think about it in the same way that the WHO's, World Health Organization's guidelines related to not specific things, but more like, well, you know, what should we aspire in health? And World Health Organization, for example, says that every individual has the right to attain the highest standard, highest level of the healthcare, or something like that, like something very aspirational. So in that sense, sort of like guiding you to the right aspiration, I think OECD principles make sense, because it mentions everything that's in the Human Rights Declaration and everything it's in this AI ethics discourse, like the robustness and transparency and so on. But in terms of like complying with it, I don't know what it means to comply with human dignity, for example. Like it requires a more specific way of describing its demands. So that's the first, that's the answer to the first part of the question. The second one was, I just pulled it up as well so that I remember. Can you talk about the difference between ethics in AI systems and moral decision-making systems? So does that, like, the way that I understand the question at least is ethics in AI systems, I think it means the ethical decision, like the value judgment that is within the AI system. So meaning, for example, when you are trying to decide in a search engine, when you want to rank the answers for a particular search keyword, if what you're trying to do is to find the most relevant answer, provide the most relevant answer, but one can make a decision, a value judgment, saying if somebody is typing coronavirus, for example, you are going to prioritize accurate decisions rather than, and maybe even global decisions, like from global authorities, rather than putting the most clicked question, the most clicked page, which could be about celebrities talking about coronavirus. So deciding what is relevant includes a value judgment in most cases. For example, is the most relevant thing the accuracy? Is the most relevant result something that we believe is socially beneficial? So another example is, for example, again, the when you are typing CEO for the Google search images, search engine images, if you get only the male faces, is that is which is not accurate, because there is the ratio is more favorable in real world. Actually, not in the CEO, in professor images. In the CEO, it's tricky. Anyway, but in the professor, when you type professor, you get overwhelmingly white male images. Well, that's not accurate. That doesn't represent the truth. But what do we want? What kind of do we want to have a value decision that's incorporated in it? Do we want to encourage more diversity, for example? That's a value judgment. So if that's what he means, but that's what Jose means by ethics in AI systems, the value judgment that goes into AI systems. But same would be the fairness question, for example. What kind of a fairness metric are we incorporating? Moral decision-making systems, I don't know what that means, because we don't actually we don't have machines that are trusted with explicit moral decision-making capacities. Like we don't, they are trusted with many implicit decisions, but not explicitly. So I'm not sure if I understand the rest of the question.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up if you want to start.
Okay. Now another question from Jose Antonio. This one is for Jeanna. Is it possible to trace back actual code back to the ethical principle or regulation that enforced it? Do you see how can a developer elicit ethical requirements and implement it?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I don't think it's a simple thing to trace back a specific line of code to a given AI ethical principle in most cases. You know, as Cansu was talking about, you know, if the principle is dignity, it's hard to trace a particular line of code back to that. And while I do think that inspection of source code is very appropriate for some critical decision-making systems, especially, you know, independent verification and validation, not necessarily, you know, completely public, but, you know, independent verifiers and validators. While I do think that that is an important element, looking at source code, there's actually a lot of other evidence we could be looking at and demanding. Evidence like testing procedures and design documents and requirements. And, you know, so for example, you can link a given test case to the requirement it's meant to test. And you can make sure that there are test cases that focus on the voices of a wide variety of stakeholders, making sure that the test cases reflect the lived experiences of people who will be affected by the system. You can involve stakeholders widely in the development of requirements for the system. You can document who you spoke to, what you did with what they said, who's represented in the training sets, who's represented in the test cases. And you can really, this is one thing I really like to say is, ask yourself, when deploying this system, if there was a bug that affected an individual or a group of individuals, what would be the hope of surfacing that and fixing it? It is unreasonable to expect that software is not going to have errors. But the question is, what is going to be the incentives for iterative improvement? There should be a way by which, when things affect people, bugs can be reported, it can be fixed, there can be redress. And many times, you know, if you ask yourself the question, what will incentivize iterative improvement of this system in response to the legitimate needs of individuals and the good of society? If you really look at it honestly, you'd say there is no good feedback loop there. And that's, I think, one place we can really look at to help developers elicit ethical requirements and implement them. Look at the full life cycle of development, not just lines of code. Thanks for that question.
Okay, thank you, Jeanna. We have another question from Jose Antonio from Germán Vidal. But before that, I want to move to some pre-cooked questions. Those are the local questions. I will share my window to talk about this question. I think now we are sharing. Okay, and this question is motivated because okay, we as a developed country, another developed country, we didn't expect nothing from the World Trade Organization. In Portuguese is Organización Comercial o Organización Mundial de Comercio, ¿no? But we expect a lot from the scientific community, from the scientific societies, from the government, and from the population. And then this question is about that. Here's the question, and I will put some local contextualization why I believe this question is important for you know, how AI and related technological products might be regulated to avoid abuses in BRICS and developing countries. BRICS are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. In other words, how to incorporate the know-how about AI technologies for educating population and avoiding their unregulated commercialization and application around the world. I see the European community and USA realized more than a decade ago the dangers of these technologies and other technologies, no? As for instance, in the case of pesticides, there is no control. I put this reference from the Fiocruz, the Fundación Osvaldo Cruz. This is about the current situation in Brazil regulating pesticides. And if you see here, we are in a big trouble because coming back to the presentation, this study from 2021 showed that the Brazilian regulation allows from almost 4,000, 400 products, pesticide, active substance, a lot of substances that are banned in countries like Iceland. 85% of the pesticides that are allowed in Brazil by the current regulations are banned in Iceland. And going back to the United States, 25% of these substances are banned in USA. You see here some European countries, 50%, India, 45%, but countries like Brazil are open to this industry. That means we are paying all the fines that these companies are paying because they are causing cancer and other problems in their population some decades ago. And it's the same thing with the artificial intelligence technology. And then I moved to a very, very, very recent situation. It's a situation from March this year, in which the Brazilian Economy Ministry regulated the recovery of forgotten resources in banks. It's called dinero esquecido, through face recognition. Okay, that was, say, the fantastic technology from 2010, 2008 in your countries, but it's now regulated. All right. In Brazil, this technology is not regulated. I saw that, for example, IBM is not commercializing any face recognition system in Brazil because it's own decision. But I go to this report only to show you what is the situation. Let I move here. I hope it works. Okay, unfortunately, I have to go to some propagandas. Let's see whether. Sorry, it's in Portuguese. I will move.
I'm not hearing the audio play. I don't know if others are hearing it play.
No, we're not hearing the audio, Professor Mauricio. You have to share your screen in another way so we can hear this material.
Okay, thank you. Okay, but I only want to show the context. That is from March this year, and the only situation is that the government forced the devolution of this dinero esquecido, forgotten money from the 70s and 80s, last century. That means for elderly people, through updating of the security of the bank accounts to the level silver and gold. And this is activated through a face recognition system that is used by smartphones. Of course, elder people and colored people in Brazil have the same problem you had 10 years ago in your countries. But okay, this is the technology that we buy, this is the technology that we implement. And the worst of all that is that, okay, the technicians from the Ministry of Economy say there is no flaws in the system. However, the body said several factors might contribute to this problem, as in the image validation occurs by facial biometrics, thereby there may be limitation of the user. The user is the problem on cell phone. The image might be polluted, impairing the person identification. Okay, it's the problem of the user. The user might be photographing himself with many objects behind, for example. Okay, the thing is that this new happens was propagated, explaining to the people, explaining to the people how to use the system, and answering for all the problems. The system is perfect. There are no flaws in the problem because we don't know, or population don't know. They are not aware about these problems, although these problems are very well known in your countries, no? You know this documentary, The Code Device, no? Talk explicitly about that. That is a documentary from 2020, talking about problems that happening in 2013, 2014. And now we are buying this technology like pesticides and implementing this happily in Brazil. Then I come back to the question, how AI and related technological products might be regulated to avoid abuses in BRICS and developed countries. In other words, how to incorporate the know-how about AI technologies for educating population. What I mean is that this technology is fantastic. We don't need to ban the technology, but we have to buy the technology with the know-how about the problems of the technology. Okay, that is the question in this context of Brazil. I don't know whether some of you want to make some comment.
I'd be happy to jump in on some aspects of this. The first, I will comment on there are no flaws in the system. Complex software has flaws. Anyone who's saying there's no flaws in the system, I would ask, what is the evidence that you have assembled of that? Mm-hmm. What testing did you do? What were the results of that testing? What errors have been found and fixed in the past? If the answer is we haven't done any testing, or we've never found any problems in this system, no matter how hard we've looked, I would call shenanigans on that, right? I think that that's just impossible. So I would focus more on any kind of regulation that you can put in place requiring evidence to be put forward about, and again, I will point to things like IEEE 1012, which is an international standard for verification and validation of hardware software systems. This is something that's used regularly for things like medical software, aviation software. I know in the US, for example, in the US, it's not used for criminal justice software where it should. Yes. So another aspect of your question, I think, related to things that are legal in Brazil that are not legal in maybe Europe or the US. And maybe there's, I believe you that there's things in that category, but most of the things you were saying, like the US just had trouble with an IRS system with facial recognition. We have trouble with pesticides and food. So I would, maybe in some places it's better than others, but I would say it's bad everywhere. And I would step back just a little and say that it is the same, like pesticides, food safety, drug safety, civil engineering, bridge safety, infrastructure safety, aviation safety. I would encourage anyone to think about critical software in those same categories. So any country or society that has a difficult time enforcing food safety or drug safety or pesticide safety or civil engineering safety is going to have probably even more trouble enforcing AI safety. But any place you can point to in the government regulations of some things and say, look, you know how to do it for this. Do it that same way. Do it very similarly for software technology. It's not a fundamentally different thing. Require verification and validation, require testing, require evidence. Don't put up with just there's no flaws in the system.
Yes, that is very common to say, okay, the system is offline, okay, then we will not do anything else, or the system is online and work perfectly.
And actually, I'd like to say one other thing about the educating the populations part. I'm not 100% sure the aspect of that question here, but one thing I'd love to kind of warn against is pushing everything to the understanding or education of the end user. It's just like, as a person who eats in restaurants, I would not like to have to personally investigate the food safety of the entire food safety system. Like, you just can't do that. You go into a restaurant, you don't inspect their kitchen. You don't know you don't go to the farm that raised the beef, or you don't see how the vegetables were washed. There's things you can't see, and you need health inspectors and other things to allow you to make a reasonable decision. Similarly, I don't stop at the edge of every bridge I'm about to drive over and like get out of my car and go and inspect the tensile strength of the bridge. It's not reasonable. You have to have other things in the system that way before an individual gets to eating in a restaurant or driving across a bridge or being subjected to facial recognition or, any other algorithmic decision, that assembled evidence before you got to that point. It shouldn't just be that, the user has to educate themselves and figure out if the bridge is safe or the meal is safe.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. I don't know whether Cansu and Claude want to complement.
I can, yes, but yes. Cansu, do you want to begin? No? I would like to say several things on your question. First, this is an important question. And as Jeanna was saying, I believe that in all countries, we are in such a situation where indeed we have to deal with exactly the same question. Maybe with different contexts, maybe with different organizations and institutions. But the situation is global. I will say that there are several kinds of education, just to contrast with what you said, Jeanna. I will say that I believe that everyone should know that drinking detergent is English, yes, I suppose. Drinking detergent is not healthy, okay, even if some people say so. So this means that you see there is a basis of education that is in some kind of common sense. So the point is that the common sense for eating, doing for the everyday life, we get it from the basic education. But we do not get really the same education with respect to the digital science and technology. And I think at least in France, is a real lack. So we need to provide people with this kind of knowledge on this kind of information, digital information processing systems. On one point. Second point, with respect to your question, Mauricio, I believe that there should be some committees. So I believe that we as Jeanna said, it is not possible to test everything that we would like to use. Okay, to test the next bridge, to test the next screen that we are using. It's not ensuring that it is not exploding and so on. So we need third parties in order to delegate our confidence. So, I think that we need to be able to have this delegation, in particular with respect to ethics, and this delegation with respect to education. Sorry, I would say not education, but regulation. Okay. Regulation. So for ethics, it is why we were asking for making this ethics committee, national ethics committee, in order to be able to think about this kind of questions, not to regulate, to think first, and to provide opinions. Okay, but these opinions next go to the regulation level, and at the regulation level, okay, they can use these opinions, they can use other opinions, in order to be able to give regulation that makes sense, knowing about relying on the third parties who knows better the basics of information processing systems. So I think that it's very important for every country, every state, for example, in Brazil, to set up some ethics committee, to set up some regulation processing system aware of digital technology and sciences, so that you can rely on them. And indeed, the government may rely on them. So of course, it depends on the government. Okay, some governments are not really hearing about what scientists or such committees, ethics committees or regulation committees provide to them. But I think at least it is important that citizens may look at that and make their own opinion, not learning about algorithmics and complexity and proof theory and so on by themselves, but relying on third party that allows them to understand the different situations. So, okay, this is my too long answer.
Okay, thank you, Claude. Thank you very much. Cansu?
I generally agree with everyone, especially Jeanna's point on the need for relying on systems rather than relying on individuals, because I think this is something that we see a lot also, like simple things, like when the decision about, when the conversation about privacy took over, everybody put on these privacy notices on all websites and expecting people to check their privacy settings, making sure that they are clicking on the right things. But this is just not feasible. Like expecting every individual to go through life, checking everything, looking at every setting, reading every detail, and being informed about everything in life is just not feasible. That's a horrible life that we are creating for ourselves. So that is not empowering individuals. That is not like prioritizing autonomy. That is just getting rid of the responsibility. The other thing is that, just to add minor things, is that if we are, I mean, I think in this question, the most important education that strikes me is the education of the policymakers. Because if somebody says that the system cannot be wrong, it is definitely working perfectly, that is either, you know, not in good faith, or if you want to be in more charitable, well, they don't understand. They think that, I mean, this was an accurate, like, this was really the case when people kept saying, well, computer knows the best, right? The computer is objective. So if you have that vision of machines, this like infallible, fantastic things, then you should not be making policy about machines, obviously, because you're just not qualified to do that. So I think before thinking about, you know, educating, I mean, not before, of course, all of these can happen at the same time, but like in terms of like, what is how could we put in place the right regulation? But we have to have the policymakers being informed. But even so, chances are they are never going to be experts. So working together with people, experts who understand these systems, who can tell them what kind of testing and evidence is required, as Jeanna said, to make those claims, even if you want to make such claims.
Okay, thank you very much, Cansu, Claude, and Jeanna. Then let's, I move to the question from, oops, I have now some problem here, sorry. Okay. The other question from Jose Antonio is for Claude. It's also in the chat, Claude. Do you know when the European Union will provide a hard law directly to AI ethics besides GDPR? And how will it be possible to organizations to comply with operationalize AI ethics?
Yes, so in the EU, there are several ways to indeed set up regulations. And there are several ethics committees set up by the Commission, and in particular, there was this high-level expert group on AI who were delivering recommendations about digital ethics and ethics of AI. Starting from that, there will be some regulations. But what the Commission and the Parliament, the European Parliament, are discussing are different versions of these regulations, and they are not always, they do not always agree on what shall we do. So we are in a situation where, for example, for facial recognition, there may be some regulation just forbidding facial recognition in public areas. It is not sure that it will be validated by all European states, but there is a proposal to go in this direction. What I would like to emphasize is that we should make, as usual, a clear difference between ethics, which is just thinking about, okay, important to think, of course, but and regulation where we have to state for rules and to apply the rules. And so currently, we are in a system where the EU is taking some ethical reflections in order to try to make regulation out of it. And this process is into design, but in order to answer clearly to the question, yes, there will be some restriction. Yes, there will be some regulation. the point is, how can we make regulations that make the most sense in the context of different culture, different regulation, even at the European level, and in a global context of a global international context. So, okay, yes, there will be regulations, and yes, there will be a regulation for AI, and in particular, in other. One of the example is what we were saying before about not only testing a system, but also proving some part of the system. Okay, so for example, we are now in a situation where we know how to perform, as you know, Mauricio, proofs of rather large systems in a very good way. But we know also that proofs are not enough, in the sense that we prove something which is abstract, and then we have to implement it on different hardware and different situations, different network situations. And so we need more than proofs. We need proof and verification at the operational level, that is testing also in different situations.
Okay. I think, thank you, Claude. Tainara Ariely de Lima question is also related with this one, and can be answered, combined with this question from Jose Antonio about the regulation in the European Union, no? It's also in the chat. It seems that the use of AI by governments or private companies is a global trend. On the other hand, it seems to me that cultural factors are influencing ethical values. In this way, it is possible, or are there efforts to provide guidelines for ethics in artificial intelligence in a universal context, since political decisions taken in a place can have global effects? I don't know whether Jeanna or Jianshu want to complement and answer this question.
I can jump in. Am I on? Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
So I think, let me sort of like say a bit more broadly a couple of things. So I think the first thing is like taking from Jose's question first. We need to be, I think it's good to understand like the relationship between ethics and law. So one way to think about it is like, in order to decide what kind of a policy we want in place, we first have to understand what is the right thing that we are trying to achieve. So that is the question that ethics is asking. So when we say, for example, what is the GDPR question? Sorry, GDPR document is relying on the argument that we want to protect privacy. So it is right to give the individual the control over their data. So that's the argument that it's reliant on, and then the regulation can be put in place. So the ethical, not just conversation, but more like even ethical argumentation, so the justification should happen before we put in place regulations. But even when we have the regulation in place, it will always be the case that the regulation will leave gray areas, or it will not cover everything. It should not cover everything. I mean, a simple example is like even if we, in cases where we know lying is wrong, and like undoubtedly wrong, we don't want regulation to cover all lying circumstances. We just want certain circumstances, like the doctor lying or the defrauding, the bank defrauding, to be the part that's covered with regulation. So we want to make sure that even in the presence of regulation, there is space for ethical decision making, and it's still taken seriously. And that can be done also by putting in regulation that encourages ethical processes. So not just saying, achieve this end goal in ethics, like always prioritize this group or whatever. But no, it's like also saying, have you done, ensuring that an AI development process has ethics documentation in place. There is a system in place where the ethical decisions are made and they are recorded and they can be checked back and they connect to the innovation process, not just like at the end of it, did we consider ethics? Yes, we did. Here are some concerns for future discussion. So making sure that there's a robust process in place could be one way that regulation incentivizes ethics. But as I said, I mean, we cannot expect regulation to cover all of ethics in any field. And in terms of the cultural and local, I think the certain aspects of ethics is pretty universal. I mean, we know this in relation to certain aspects of many aspects of human rights, many aspects of bioethics. The value of autonomy, the value of fairness, or the idea of reducing suffering and harm are not contested around the world. What changes is the value, the weight given to different aspects. So like, for example, privacy might not be as valued around the world in the same degree. And that is something that we have to take into account while we are making decisions regarding how to do these trade-offs between privacy and transparency, or privacy and well-being, for example. So these different sensitivities are things that we have to take into account, and that's not new. I mean, many regulations and many applied ethics, again, bioethics, health law, all of these are trying to strike this balance. So we are not in an uncharted territory in some sense.
I also will.
Thank you, Jeanna.
Should I elaborate a little, or did you want to move on to another question?
No. I was to thank first Yanshu, and then give you the word.
Yes.
The floor.
I mentioned this a little in the opening portion of what I said, how there's no one definition of fairness or no one definition of ethics. So I would say, or what Cansu had said about there are things that are fairly universal. I think that is true, and how a lot of it boils down to the different weights. But I often like to think about it as almost like who or what gets a vote, in a sense. And it's really when different categories of benefit or harm come into conflict with one another. It's like the trolley problem, right? So you can want the best for individuals and you can want the best for society. But when those two things come into conflict, which is more important, individual rights or collective rights? So when I'm not an ethicist, but I think about it a little bit this way, like, is what reigns supreme individual rights? Or is what reigns supreme my family or my local community or my country, like nationalism, maybe not so good. Are every person on the planet equally, important to prioritize? What about species? Like, should humans get, the only vote here? You can expand your circle of concern. And when the benefits and drawbacks to different things within that circle of concern come into conflict, there's no one right answer to that. And so that's why I usually come back to kind of the way we use political processes to advocate for ourselves or whatever circle of concern we have. What disturbs me about AI systems in particular is when people are told, oh, this is going to be good for everyone. There's not going to be trade-offs here. When there's going to be huge trade-offs here, and we're not enabling people to see what those trade-offs are and advocate actively in the political decision-making process, when we kind of short circuit that.
Okay, thank you, Jeanna.
May I elaborate also a little bit?
All right, please complement, Claude.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I think that we have to deal. Everyone should indeed have his on hierarchy of values. That is what Jeanna was saying. Okay, indeed, because not only different cultures, but even in the same family. Okay, you may prioritize different things, and this means that what is important is why, for me, the definition of ethics as a reflection about hierarchy of values, in order to understand how you position yourself in such and such situation. This is really the way I would like to understand what is ethics. So now, of course, when we deal with digital systems, some systems are programmed in such a way that they are fully deterministic. Like when you compute 2 + 2, you prefer to get 4, and you use that as a deterministic system. But when you have to take decisions, of course, the parameters are much more complex. And in this situation, it depends on what kind of priority you would like to put on these different parameters. Like, for example, because you would like to buy a new house, and then you have to maybe to understand how much money you can get and how you would like to spend this money for different actions, including buying the house. So this means that different people will take different decisions using this different kind of hierarchy of values. So the questions is really, of course, not only for individuals, but also for collectivities. And really, for example, what I do not quite understand in the OCDE principle for AI is that they are using value as a parameter. Indeed, I don't remember exactly okay. I believe that one of the principles is that we should respect human values or things like that. Okay? So, but what kind of values? There are so many. Okay, so this means that when you use a word like value, indeed, the 4 of us are understanding something different. So value that are important for each of us in a given situation. So we should be precise, and I believe that there is no system that allows us to formalize AI and to formalize this reasoning on value hierarchies. So we are able to formalize value hierarchies. So this is not so difficult. Okay, this is not total orders and so on, but we have mathematical tools and computer science tools, informatics tools that allows us to do so. But to reason after on that, it's a human reasoning. It's not something that we can formalize completely, my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much, Claude. Then we have a post-humanistic question from Germain Vidal, but I will try to optimize and join this question with our post-humanistic question. Then let me show you. I have to share. And then the question from Germain Vidal. Sorry, I have to see the chat. Is related with the possibility to mathematically and rigorously decide what an ethical AI system is and how it can mathematically be certified. Then I think this question is related with my question that perhaps is not very well formulated because it's a post-humanistic question. Let's see. I will move to this question. And okay, in the last years, okay, the years of my life, I saw a lot of say speculations about okay, science fictions, intelligences, end of the war, and a lot of films about that. But the thing is that we have a very, 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 very restricted technology, mathematical technology, that is used to simulate intelligence. That is what we know as abstract intelligence, the cognitive human intelligence. And since a while, Walter Pitt, for instance, made the first model from predicate logic of the neuron in the 40s or beginning of the 50s. That is a famous work in which he modeled one neuron without knowing what is a neuron. But okay, he used mathematics to think about how is the behavior from a neuron. But this is what we believe and unfortunately share as artificial intelligence. And I think it's perhaps it's the time to move to another concept that will be the concept of artificial wisdom. We have the intelligence, the human intelligence, a kind of human intelligence that is the one we model with mathematics and logic and with the statistics now, with a lot of success, technological, marketing, etc., etc. But we need to distinguish what we are really doing. We are doing artificial intelligence. We are not doing artificial wisdom. And you mentioned some differences. I refer some words from the Mark Zuckerberg MIT Artificial Intelligence Ethic from 2020. Okay, A is related to an abstract and cognitive kind of human intelligence. We need intelligent machines and also smart people. The smart people is the people who know, we need to take moral, ethical decisions according to the principles we follow in each point of the world, in each country, in each culture. Wisdom is related to the way we answer political and ethical questions, how to lie, and how we deal with our environment, and as Jeanna say, how we deal with other species. Okay, then there are controversies about what is moral, what is ethic, what is a good moral principle, what is a good ethic principle, because we all have a different vision about that. But okay, this is the question. It's not time to distinguish in science and technology to say artificial intelligence is exactly that, the way in which we can model the human intelligence, only the human intelligence, with mathematics, logic, and statistic. This is a thing. With this thing, you can win Go games, you can win other games, and you can make a kind of machine intelligence research and give some specific kind of recommendations. But wisdom and human wisdom is other thing. Then my question is, it's not urgent in science and technology to distinguish, to let to the people clear what we have in hands as humanity, as scientists and social and technological scientists. And related with this question, not only the question from German Vidal, because German Vidal is wanting to use mathematics to check ethics, that I think maybe I am wrong. That is impossible for me. I want to make this separation. And regarding this, I have a challenge for you. That is a challenge that is a question that has to have with art, poetry, and it's related with the favorite sport from the Brazilian people, football. Then the question is whether artificial intelligence might solve this challenge, this technological challenge, deciding which was the best Soccer World Cup goal. That is a kind of joke. Or we need wisdom, artificial wisdom to solve this question, because this has to do with my principles, my culture, etc., etc., etc. For instance, for many people, perhaps the beautiful goal was the Maradona goal from 1986, the famous hand of God goal. But many people think this is completely anti-ethical to make a goal with the hand. But for a specific culture in South America, this has a value, an amazing value, because this goal comes after the Malvinas War between Britain and Argentina. And this was also a goal from Argentina against Britain. Okay. For other people, Colombia people, James Rodriguez's best goal from the World Cup in 2014 should be the better goal. And for the French people, perhaps Power 2018 goal was the best goal of the history of all World Cups. But the question is, it's in soccer poetry. Will artificial intelligence be able to check all the possibilities? I am thinking we have the statistic mechanism, the mathematical logic and statistics mechanisms to check, but we are not even a disadvantage from small countries like Uruguay. Uruguay has only 5 million inhabitants, and perhaps a big country like China, a populated country like China, Brazil, USA, will have more votes. We have more digital information about this question. Then I come back to the question. And the question is, in science and technology, it's not time to separate artificial intelligence from human wisdom, to make that clear.
Okay, I may begin, but okay. I would like to say a few short sentences. The first thing is that artificial intelligence is a name for a scientific domain. Okay, it is not anything else. Okay, so in artificial intelligence, there is no intelligence. Okay, there is just some scientific developments that are the one I have presented in my presentation. Second point is that thinking about intelligent machine, I think for me it's no sense. Okay. Machines are by definition stupid. They are making what we tell them to do only. Okay, even if when they are learning, okay, it is processes that we implement on them, and these processes, they are just programs that apply things. There is no creativity, no real creativity behind that, except the one that we put in them. Okay, so machines are stupid by definition. So thinking about intelligent machine does not make sense. We need intelligent people, and this is not so easy indeed. And something which is not easy at all is what is the definition of intelligence and what is the definition of wisdom. Okay, so also when we think about human, okay, to define this kind of things is not so easy. So and in order to finish, and we should not confuse model with reality. Model are always approximation of reality, and I'm sorry, but we are, as biological entities, are part of the reality, and things like machine using AI in the sense of scientific discipline are just trying to make approximation of what we are doing. Okay, that's all for me.
Okay, thank you, Claude. Jeanna, do you want to complement, or Cansu?
Sure. Can I share my screen just a second?
Yeah, yes.
Do you mind?
Sorry about that. Okay.
Here is a fun, speaking of connections between AI and creative writing, maybe not poetry, but fiction anyway, and sports. There is a short story, We're Patched, that I got a chance to respond to for Slate, and both the short story itself and the response are pretty short, but they're very related to what we're talking about today. So in this short story, there is a human referee, but then there's also an automated referee. And the automated referee tries so hard to be helpful and is so like the human doesn't seem to get them and they feel discriminated against. And then their call is challenged. You know, it's very much about, and it's also about who should win, which is fundamentally what we're talking about here. Who should be winners and losers in this new AI future? And kind of who decides, how you decide. All of these things are so present in this short story. And interestingly, in this short story, there is kind of a, I would say like more a traditional winning player, maybe like a tall, strong male player. And there's like a short, scrappy woman player. And interestingly, it is the automated system that prefers the more traditional winning player, so to speak, the stereotypical winning player, which I think is very similar to AI systems. They're trained on things from the past, so they're going to predict that who should win in the future is who's won in the past. Then, I would invite you to read my response to this. And there's a lot of fun links here to things like Madeline Claire Ellish's The Moral Crumple Zone, which I think is really awesome. And quite a few other very relevant things to the thing we've been talking about here. I will leave that as a potential to-do item for listeners should you be interested in connecting sports and AI and creative writing. But then I would love to end on this topic of wisdom. And I wonder if maybe this is something that could help bring us full circle a little bit. We were talking about how there's no one set of ethics or fairness, that when things come into conflict about deciding your priorities, individuals or communities at different levels, whether it's families or local communities or nations or the world or all the species. Maybe wisdom would be understanding that that the well-being of any of those levels is dependent on the well-being of the others. That maybe it's not so much things that are in conflict, but things that need to be unified. And I don't know how well AI will ever help us figure that out. I don't know. I suppose that remains to be seen. But this question of what people are still good at anymore is another interesting thing versus automated systems. We know we're good at solving CAPTCHAs. We are. What else are we good at? Are we good at art and music? AI are producing art and music. So that question of what are we fundamentally good at is a fun one, and I will just leave the question there for everyone to ponder.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeanna.
So I guess since the conversation got so philosophical, let me jump in as a philosopher. So I'm going to take a little, again, going a little bit backwards in the conversation the last couple of rounds. So I think when we are talking about ethics, because it's such a familiar concept, such a familiar topic, we are using the words more liberally than we would use in like a scientific conversation. So when we say, for example, everybody has a different ethics, that's not exactly true, because ethics, just like Claude said about AI, is a field. It is a systematic way of decision making, and that is what we say is what, like the structure is what is ethics. And then what kind of ethical decision making we go about is where, or what kind of fairness definition we employ are where we have different competing theories. And I would put in a word for all the 2 millennia of philosophical work there in getting us a little bit ahead, in the sense that what we differ, like the discussions, I think Jeanna's points here were also relevant, like the specific, who do we consider as we make our calculation about the harm, for example, is what we ask, we did make some headway in our ethical discourse, in the sense that we can separate these different questions and say, okay, but what is even the value that we are discussing? Like, what are we trying to achieve here in ethics? And then we have some theories that give us an answer, and then a way of thinking about it. And I would also want to insist that it is not just reflection, because if it is just reflecting, I mean, literally taking it like that would mean, well, we can reflect on slavery being great or sexism being fantastic, and we don't call those things ethics or ethically valid, for example. So we are not completely relativist in our way of thinking about ethics, and I don't think we, as a Middle Eastern female, I would insist that we shouldn't be completely relativist in all in ways of thinking about ethics and values. So there is a way of going about, and consistency is a big help here, because in insisting on consistent decision making and putting those different layers out, what is the value? What is, if you employ this reasoning here, how would you go about in this case? As like Francis Camp's like endless trolleys gets us somewhere, actually. So taking it to the question posed about the ethical AI, well, if we are thinking about ethical AI like godlike, like infallibly ethical AI, I guess we can't have that, because we don't have a single ethical theory that we agreed upon. But if we think a human can be ethical, meaning that, well, we disagree between each other, like we can have different ways of thinking about a particular action, and can be justified, truly justified in our own ways, meaning not just like taste and preferences, but really in consistent way of justifying our position, then technically, not technically, actually, that's not the right word. Theoretically, an AI system can also be consistently following an ethical way of reasoning, and following a set of ethical values, and following them in a coherent structure. And Mauricio, going back to your question about like what is the best goal in the history? Well, can a human answer that question? if a human cannot, I mean, what does that mean about human wisdom or human intelligence, and how do we compare it to the AI wisdom and AI intelligence? So I think when we are discussing ethics or AI systems impact on society, we have to remember also that, like, we are not what we can do versus what a machine can theoretically do. So like humans are not infallible either. Humans are not always ethical either. And if we are asking whether a machine theoretically can follow like an ethical reasoning, I think the answer, theoretically, not our current AI systems, but the answer is, I think, is a yes.
Yes, what I mean is that the wisdom intelligence should be enough wise and diplomatic to give the answer, the correct answer that will let people be happy. In each country, in each culture, the answer is different. And this is wisdom. Then
yeah,
I really
imagine an AI system that also has like a cultural input system then. I mean, an AI system could have, I mean, AI system, a machine, let's say, a hypothetical machine can also have that aspect, no?
Yes, I really have a trick in this question, that is the deciding which was the best social World Cup goal, no? Then I imagine some artificial intelligence that research in the videos, in the internet, photos, etc., and decide. But you know, this question has a trick that is a gender bias, because when you think about the World Cup, you have the women and men World Cup, and perhaps the beautiful goals are from players like Megan Rapinoe or Marta in the World Cup from 2007 and 2019, respectively. Nowadays, surely Megan Rapinoe has the best, the beautiful goal in USA, because he was involved in the achievements to have equality salaries between the men's and women and things like that. But you will have always this data bias and algorithmic bias, and the wisdom intelligence will have a specific and different and diplomatic answer for each culture, for each group. Okay, that's what the joke say. Okay. I have to close now. I have sent you the second question. I shown this question, but okay, this was more with the Brazilian contest, I think. But I am really very, very happy. And it was amazing receiving such an amount of up-to-date knowledge about ethics in technology. I know, and I hope I will understand in short some things you are working on. In particular, I am very interested in the policy in the ethics committee in the IEEE, the ASN, in which Jeanna is involved, also in the digital ethics committee in France, and of course, I want to understand your model, Cansu. I am aware of the ethics by design or embedded ethics design, and I want to understand the difference from your puzzle model, and what are the advantages of this model regarding the development of okay, such a kind of technologies by these paradigm ethics by design. Then I hope in short we will meet and see and have more debates, roundtables, and so on, because it's urgent for the Brazilian community. Thank you very much again to all of you. It was terrific.
Thank you, Mauricio. And,
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanna and Cansu.
Okay. Good night. Sleep well, Claude.
Yeah.
I know you are 11 o'clock in the
Yeah, okay. Still
Midnight
okay.
here. I'm in Turkey, so midnight here.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Okay.
Good night.
And good day, you guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.